Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special episode of Hard Claim with Viva La Sam. I'm Sam. This is a show where we talk to people who play Blood on the Clocktower and get their player perspective of the game. Joining us for this very special episode is James from the Pandemonium Institute. James, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this game and this character.
Yeah, no problem. And so this episode is a little different. Anybody who's watching this will have seen the thumbnail and the title. We're here to talk specifically about the wizard. Hopefully, maybe we can have James on some other time to do a normal hard claim interview. But yeah, I'm very excited for this. I thought that of all characters that deserved a specific video to discuss, well, how do you play this character? Wizard felt like a good opportunity, I thought. So I guess to start out, James, what is the wizard and what's it all about?
Oh, yeah. So the wizard is a minion whose ability is once per game, choose to make a wish. If granted, it might have a price and leave a clue as to its nature. So there are three big things going on in that, three new words essentially for the game that we haven't had in any character or ability before. Number one is a wish. So the wizard gets to make a wish, and this could be literally anything at all. There are no restrictions to what that wish is. And the wish is not something that's attached to the wizard as a character. So the wish is actually something that changes the way the game is being played. It might change a rule of the game, it might change something about the stakes of the game. It could change literally anything. It could also keep things the same. It doesn't have to change something fundamental. But whatever that wish is, it enters play, and then, even if the wizard dies, their wish is still active and affecting the game because the wish is not something that's attached again to the wizard as a character. It's just something that enters play independently of the wizard person. Um, so that's where you start with this wish. Obviously, there are a lot of things that a wizard player could wish for that are incredibly broken. For example, the evil team wins the game immediately. That would not be very balanced. And so, this wish, in order for the storyteller to have tools to keep the game balanced, also has a price usually attached to it. Something that the storyteller can do to say, okay, you want this really awesome, powerful thing to happen for you and for your team. Great, here's what I'm going to do to balance it out. And this is something we're familiar with in Clocktower. We have things like the Sailor, where it's like, okay, your power is overpowered. You can't die. You can never die. The balance of that is that one other person on your team is going to be drunk. And so that's like pretty consistent with other clock tower abilities where you have,
Mhm.
powerful thing that your character can do, consequence that hurts you for doing that powerful thing. And so the storyteller is empowered to set that price for the wish. This can also be a collaborative process where the storyteller says to the wizard, like, hey, okay, this is the thing you want. What do you think would be fair and balanced if I actually do this thing for you? And so that can be a discussion between the wizard and the storyteller. It doesn't just have to be the storyteller independently saying, cool, you wish for this, great, I'm going to go off into my like secret storyteller lair and decide what to do to balance that out. And then the last piece of the wizard ability is this clue. So whenever you make a wizard wish, the storyteller will set a price to kind of balance out the wish. And then, depending on what the wish is and how it's going to be visible or solvable or find outable to the people in the game, the storyteller might also choose to do some sort of clue. And so they might say something, they might give someone an additional piece of information or additional context, they might like make an announcement that you wouldn't expect. And so often this clue is telling players in the game, one, the wizard has done something, and two, this is a hint to the specific thing that the wizard has done. So that's kind of the three pieces of the wizard ability. One is the wish that the wizard is making. Two is the price that the storyteller is putting into place to balance out the wish. And then three is the clue, which is usually just some sort of hint in some way. It can be really creative to say to everyone in the game, there's something afoot, something is happening.
Part of the fun of it is, you mentioned the wish can be, something that bends the game, adds a new rule, etc., etc. That's usually something limited to a storyteller for an amnesiac or an atheist, and that puts that in the player's hands. And really, why I think this video is such a fun idea is because I know for myself, I'm not a particularly creative person, so to have a starting point, it's like, well, okay, what do you do with the wizard would be uh, it's a it's a good starting point, I guess. And so I guess to start with that, where would a wizard start to make a wish? And probably a good place to start with that would be the script that we have available. This is the reveal script for the wizard. Uh, so I don't know. So maybe you should start talking about why is wizard on this script? How does it interact here?
Yeah, so the wizard is it's almost a blessing and a curse as an ability because it's on one hand incredibly open-ended. Make a wish. It could be literally anything. And on the other hand, that's in a lot of ways like decision paralysis for people, even people who are like sort of inherently like, oh, I have all these ideas for what I could do. You still have to kind of take the time to be like, what do I actually want to do in this game? And the other characters on the script definitely become relevant for that on this script in particular. So this was created by the Bazaar, which is a group that contains Patters and Alex S, who wrote Fall of Rome. And I specifically reached out to them to say, hey, I'd love for you guys to put together a script for the wizard because I know they're constantly thinking about ways to push the game and ways to specifically push character design in directions that haven't been tried before, which is really ideal for a character like the wizard because it's specifically saying, hey, you're no longer restricted to the character abilities that are on a script or that exist in the game. You can do literally anything. One of the big things for the wizard is that they do have to visit the storyteller in some way to make their wish. They don't have to do it during the day, so they can actually like raise their hand at night or say to the storyteller in the day, "Can you wake me up at night? I'd like to wake my wish at night." They can do it publicly. They can do it privately. There are no restrictions for the wizard on how their wish is made, but I would say 9 times out of 10, the wizard does just go to the storyteller during the day and say, "Hey, this is my wish." And so, with that in mind, we wanted to make sure that there were a couple of characters on the script that are good, that also have reasons to visit the storyteller. Because if the wizard is the only thing on the script that visits the storyteller, and they do so during the day, everyone in the game would be like, well, that's the wizard because they went to the storyteller and then this weird stuff started happening. And so I do think it is really important from a script building standpoint to actually have a couple of good characters that have reasons to go to the storyteller. But beyond that, I know that the folks putting the script together, they really wanted to make sure there were lots of different abilities that the wizard could play off of and that might mimic things that could happen in a wizard game. So, for example, the Boffin giving a demon an ability. If, let's say, the Boffin, there's not a Night Watchman on this script, but if there was a demon that had the Night Watchman ability from the Boffin and they were choosing not to claim to be the Night Watchman, somebody just getting told randomly, Viva La Sam is the Night Watchman might look like something that could happen in a wizard game. Similarly, with the Plague Doctor, extra minion abilities being in play might look like something that could happen in a wizard game. And so, giving a lot of space, like an amnesiac. Amnesiac is, as you mentioned, essentially the closest thing we have right now to a good wizard, where it's like, hey, this person has an ability that isn't in play, that isn't something you know is going to be happening. And so, weird stuff that you don't expect might be in play. And so I think that's a big part of the wizard script in general is just to have other explanations for strange things that you wouldn't expect. But as far as actually starting a wish, I do think looking at what's on the script can be a really good place to start. We had an example of a game a few weeks ago where the wizard had this like goal to make a wish that essentially affected I don't remember what the wish was, but I do remember that it affected the way that players were using picking abilities in the night. And so the wish was something along the lines of like, if a good player chooses someone with their ability in the night, they actually choose a neighbor instead. And so if the dreamer was like trying to dream somebody to learn what they were, they'd get dreamer information, but really it was on the person to their left. And I think that was a really interesting and fun wish. The problem was the wizard didn't realize in that game that there was only like one character that picked. I think it was the
Hmm.
fortune teller, and they had died night two. And so
No, no.
their wish just didn't really have much of an impact on the good team in that game. And the price of the wish had been that it also impacted the evil team. And so then they were having a very interesting
Oh
time because they were
no.
like trying to kill someone and they were like, why is the person to the left dying? And so it does, yeah, it does really balance out where I think looking at the script and going, okay, what if I want to affect good players' abilities, what abilities do I think are in play and what abilities do I want to be able to impact? Sometimes the script can also just be a good starting point for a more subtle wizard wish if you want to do something that introduces maybe multiple copies of an ability. I was testing the script actually in person 2 days ago, and we had somebody who came up to me and he said, I was going to wish for more minions, but I think I'd rather wish for more minion abilities. And I instantly said, that's very good because if you had wished for more minions, the price of the wish would have been that all the good team just became minions, which might not have been very good for your team. And so in that case, I was like, okay, cool. More minion abilities gives me a lot of flexibility because I could do something really simple, just like make more people Ceranovus mad or make people poisoned. What I ended up doing in that situation was going and essentially picking various off script minion abilities, using them on mostly good players, but occasionally evil players to not hide it. But then the clue and a bit of the price of the wish was that any minion ability that entered play was also publicly announced during the night. So the first night that this happened, I didn't say anything about the wish during the day. You know, the player was bluffing amnesiac. He came up to me, he made the wish, he went back. And then that night, right before I started the day, I just said, I would like to announce that Alex has been selected by the witch. And everyone burst out laughing because they were like, what's happening? Like, this must be a wizard, but like, that's super weird. And Alex was the cannibal who had the mayor ability and had just been targeted by the demon and, you know, not died because of the mayor ability. And it was a really interesting process for the players because then some of them were sort of like, Alex, like, you should nominate and see what happens. And Alex was like, I'm the cannibal. I don't want to nominate. Like, that's not what I want. Um, and then, you know, later in the game, I had a very funny moment where I made I think final four was 2 living good players and 2 living evil players. And so the 2 living good players, I made one harpy mad that the other one was evil. But then I announced, you know, Kyle is mad. Or I think I said, yeah, I would like to announce that Kyle and Vivian have been selected by the harpy. And so then, you know, first thing in the day, I was like, I think Vivian's evil. And Vivian goes, I think Kyle's evil. And it was just the funniest balance of people like, and everyone knew that they were mad, but people didn't really know what the consequences of madness were. And that actually, I know we said before this, we were like, we're going to start talking about things and it's going to lead into 10 other things.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the biggest things that is a benefit to the wizard ability that I don't think people think about, which is just the chaos of the wizard is such a diversion from the actual puzzle of solving the game and solving who the demon is, that is so much power that I don't think people necessarily see like chaos and diversion as power in the same way as misinformation per se. Like, it's, I think it's really intuitive that a poisoner who poisons a fortune teller is really powerful for the evil team, because if you poison the fortune teller, you're like, okay, they were going to get a yes saying this is the demon. They were going to learn who the demon is. Instead, now they're like, oh, that person's not the demon unless I'm poisoned. And that's 2 more pieces of puzzle. But if people are following their information, they're going to say, okay, well, this person's less likely to be the demon. When you think about misinformation as far as like it impacts the game, it's pretty, I think, straightforward, pretty intuitive. It's much less intuitive to go, okay, there's a weird thing happening and people want to understand what it is. So they're going to spend more time talking about what it is and thinking about it and working through like what this strangeness is. And by doing that, they're going to spend less time talking about the game. Like, I personally don't find that very intuitive to be like, that matters. That's different. That's like something that's going to help my team. If people are talking about this funny announcement that was happening in the night, and if people are pretending to be harpy mad because they might actually be harpy mad, and then everyone's laughing about that, that helps my team as an evil player. I
Mhm.
don't think that intuitively, and I think it's such a good part of the wizard ability, because such a big part of the wizard's power, Patters and I were talking the other day, and I think I forget which one of us said it, but one of us is basically like, when you're playing in a wizard game, you can solve the wizard ability or you can solve the game. And if you try to do both, you won't win because you're not going to have time to do both. And sometimes, like, that's not necessarily universally true. I think it's possible
Mhm.
to have time to do both. But I do think, in my experience, both like running and playing in these games, the thing that I've noticed time and time again is that if you really like fall into that urge and like let yourself be kind of like subsumed by that desire to solve what the wizard wishes and figure out what the wizard did, you spend all of your time doing that, and then you get to the final day and you're like, wait, we have no idea who the demon is, and we've spent all of our time trying to figure out why there's announcements in the night saying that this person has been selected by the Cerenovus. And so it's a really interesting balance, I think. And one of the things when you are making a wish is you can actually think about like what's something that's going to make people talk about a lot and think about a lot, and what's like a fun thing that people are going to want to talk and think about, because the more that they're talking and thinking about your wizard wish, the less that they're talking and thinking about who the demon is.
I don't think I would have really thought of that point either. So it's really interesting to think about, and it plays slightly into one of the questions I was going to ask, which was I guess the idea of making a wish with bigger consequences versus making a wish with lesser consequences that maybe are maybe not as loud.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was talking to Steven about the wizard, one of the things I noticed was, in the wizard ability, it says choose to make a wish if granted. And so one of the first questions I asked Steven when we were putting together, resources for the wizard was, when should you not grant a wizard wish?
Mm-hmm.
And I was expecting there to be an answer to that of like, these are the times when. And he goes, no, I always want to grant a wizard wish. The point of the wizard is to grant the wish, is to let them do their thing. But if the wish is really unbalanced, then the consequences should be really steep. And he said, which I absolutely love and I do think is genuinely quite useful, if the wish is that powerful for the evil team and that broken, then the price of the wish should be that the wizard turns good. So if the wizard wishes, I wish the game ended right now in an evil victory, great, you're good, you lose. And so I think that is genuinely like when you're thinking about the balance, if you wish something that is truly going to be that unbalanced in favor of the evil team, the price is almost definitely going to be that you're not on that team anymore. And then you, as the wizard, have to go convince everyone else that you, in fact, did this thing, and that you have a huge problem, and that like, okay, the wish is that the evil team wins at the end of the day. Great, I'm good now. We have to kill this person right now. And if that person is bluffing Saint, the good team is going to be like, what is happening? Do we really want to believe this person and kill the Saint right now? It opens up all of these possibilities. And so it's absolutely bonkers. But I do think that that is genuinely when you have a wizard token, if you're thinking about a wish and you're going, do I think this is going to be balanced? One of the questions you can ask yourself is, if I do this, what is the likelihood that I will stay on the evil team and this will benefit me specifically? And so that can be a good starting point for the wizard and for that wish.
Making a wish that maybe has bigger consequences. Those are definitely some example of bigger consequences, or maybe something that's a little bit quieter, wouldn't have as big of a clue perhaps, and bigger consequences, but something maybe something to just give a slight edge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, so bigger consequences, obviously. If you go too big, you personally
Mhm.
will reap the consequences of that. But I think what's fun about the wizard is that you have so many different options. It's obviously tempting to be like, let me do something crazy. I've never had
Mhm.
the opportunity as a character in the game to completely invent something that's part of the game. And for some players, that's going to be really exciting and a big draw. And then for other players, especially I found like more mechanically minded players are very interested in looking at what's on the script and looking at sort of what worlds they might want to build in the game and saying, hey, actually, if the good team can't figure out that there is a wizard in play, like that might benefit me even more. And so sometimes a really quiet wish can be really helpful and really useful. The first time that I personally ever drew a wizard token, this was like a few years ago, and I hadn't thought before about what to do as the wizard, and I kind of got the token and was very excited and very like, I don't know what to do. Like I haven't thought about this.
Mhm.
I'm a little bit like, I'm not sure. And I was thinking about just different clock tower characters and things that you could maybe like unconventionally do with them. And I thought, I personally really like the idea of making a wish that when you propose it to the storyteller, it already kind of has its own built in balance and price and consequence, because the price and the clue aren't necessary components to the ability, but they are components to the ability that need to be, they need to be considered and thought about. And so
Mhm.
I've found that when you come to the storyteller and you say, hey, here's the wish I want to do, and here is how I envision it being balanced, sometimes that means the storyteller doesn't have to come up with a consequence, a price, and a clue themselves, because you've already sort of presented it as built in. And so the first time that I was the wizard, I actually just wished that I could gain the pit hag ability after I died. And so I was like, I think the price of this is that when I'm alive, I have no ability. I'm just sitting here and I have to get myself killed. There's no guarantee that I will die. I'm going to have
Hmm.
to actively like work to die, which is already going to look weird. And that in itself is a clue because the role I was claiming was like essentially a poppy grower. It was like, you really want to stay alive. And so it was going to be kind of hard to get me killed. And once I was, and the demon didn't know I'd made this wish. And the demon, I was like, I don't think I'd have to go talk to him if I wanted to tell him, like, please kill me in the night so that I can start pit hagging people. Um, and so I don't think the storyteller actually did anything to sort of say like this is the wish. He was just like, yeah, that seems really balanced and fair. You can be the pit hag once you're dead, and you'll be active like after you've died. And then I did get myself killed, and once I was dead, I was like, "Oh, now I can start pit hagging people," which was then sort of a hint to what was going on because there was no pit hag on the script.
Right.
And so I think if there had been a pit hag on the script, it would have made sense for the storyteller to say like a pit hag ability has entered play as just a really straightforward clue. But because there wasn't one, the fact that like multiple players started coming out and saying like I've been pit hagged, they were like, "Okay, there's wizard stuff going on. It's weird." And going back to what we were talking about earlier, if players had tried to figure out, like, okay, Jams is specifically the dead wizard pit hag, that would have taken so much away from figuring out where the demon was in that game.
Hmm.
As it was, I think our demon was bluffing atheist. And so, in hindsight, I do think maybe it might have helped the good team to have a little bit of an extra hint because random players being turned into different characters when an atheist on the script does look a lot like an atheist game. But
Yeah.
in this case, it was a wizard game. Yeah, but I do think, yeah, subtle wishes can be really fun. I saw someone once just wish for the demon to be told who the best person to kill was each night before they died. And then I don't actually remember what the price or clue was in that situation. I think the price might have been that they learned the second best person instead of the best. And then the clue was something like the storyteller saying something to the effect of like the evil team is smarter than you or something like that to just kind of hint like they have more information than they would normally when they're making these kills. So yeah, in general, I think the wizard ability, like it, it's whatever the wish is going to be, it should be something powerful, it should help your team, but because it is something that is created by the player who doesn't have all the information in the game, the storyteller can and should be using what they can in their power to balance that out and really make sure that the game is still going to be fun for everyone involved. And that kind of getting back to the question of like what should be the power level of the wish, one of the things that I really like to ask my players if they make a wish that I am worried might not be fun for players in the game is I will say to them, how do you envision this being fun for everyone once it's in play? Because giving that back to the wizard and making that more of a conversation leaves a lot of space to kind of put the wizard in other players' shoes and go,
Hmm.
wait a second, if I was good and this was what was happening, I would actually be having a terrible time and I don't want that. And then you can workshop the wish with the wizard. It doesn't have to be like the wizard comes, they say, this is what I want, and then they leave. And then you sit there going, how do I balance this? It very much can be a conversation, which is why I think specifically it actually helps a lot to have, again, like Savant, Fisherman, Amnesiac, characters on the script that are going to
Hmm.
go and spend an extended period of time talking to the storyteller and kind of having that back and forth so that it just doesn't look as like obvious that that person is a wizard.
Yeah, this is great too because you're hitting most of my talking points already before I've even asked them. One of the questions what I was going to ask, and I don't know if you want to expand on it any, is, and this kind of crosses over a little bit with storytelling, which is fine. But I guess should the wizard be attempting to negotiate the price and the clue with the storyteller, or how much room is there for that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of space for the wizard to kind of come into it and saying like, "Hey, this is what I want." I played a game recently where the evil team, for reasons that I don't think I can talk about, had two wizards. And so the two of us on the first day, like we got in a chat together and I was one of them. And we were like, what do we want to do? Like it would it be fun to kind of have wishes that played off of each other? And because we were testing it, I was very specifically like, I think it would be fun to push the person who's storytelling because we, in this case, wanted to see how storytellers who hadn't run the wizard before dealt
Mm,
with being just given a wish and like what they did to balance, just for for playtest purposes, basically to understand what does it look like when someone who's never run this character before is just thrust in the position of doing it for the first time. And so I was like, let's make it hard for him. Let's like not just give him something nice and balanced. And so the wishes that we came up with. I think there was a golem on this script. And so the other wizard said, I wish that everyone has the golem ability. And then I said, I wish that everyone has the recluse ability. Because, yeah, you see where this is going. And then we got the storyteller in our chat and we were like, what do you think about this? Which obviously incredibly broken. If every single player has the recluse ability, then no one can get realistic information. And that way, like, even if you say to the town, everyone has the recluse ability, like it's still brutal, right? The fortune teller, what are they going to do? The oracle, just their ability, what, how does that help? Thankfully, things like a shugenja or a steward, like they've already gone. But even like
Mhm.
a cannibal, if you do that on day one, the cannibal eats the shugenja, their information. Nonsense. Like they have no way to figure that out. And so I said it knowing that my intention behind saying I wish that everyone has the recluse ability was just I wish that every person could register as the demon to the golem ability that everyone now has. And so this I let the storyteller like kind of like process for a few minutes, and then I was like, no, like this is kind of my intention in this is what I would want out of this wish. And so it was, I think, a good like actual, we did have like a pretty long conversation with the storyteller in this situation where we kind of sat and we talked about like what do we actually want out of the wish. Like the words we said was everyone has the golem ability, everyone has the recluse ability, but in practice what we wanted was just like everyone can only has one nomination for the rest of the game, and sometimes when they nominate somebody they'll die and sometimes they won't. And so the price was a combination of things. One, the storyteller made it incredibly clear to every single player that they could only nominate one more time in the game. Two, if the demon was nominated, obviously they wouldn't die because it is the golem ability. And because the storyteller made it so clear that everyone had only one nomination for game and golem was on the script, the players in this case were pretty sure, even before nominating, that they did have the golem ability. Thankfully, the demon was not the first person nominated. And so when the first person was nominated, they died. And then it looked very like obviously like okay, we all have the golem ability, that's what the wizard's done. um, but I think what happened sort of later than that was, there was somebody who was nominated, they didn't die to the golem ability, and players were like, oh, wait. And so that was an interesting sort of balance of the clue, was like when that person was killed and wasn't the demon, players realized, okay, something else is afoot, like this is what's happening. And so I think it's really important to give players the tools to know just how off things are as the storyteller. But yeah, it very much can be like a big back and forth of talking to the player and coming like if you I think if you come in saying this is how I want the consequence to be, the storyteller can be like, okay, cool, I'm going to take that on and consider it. Sometimes I have just straight up used what the player envisions. Sometimes I've said this makes a lot of sense, but there's going to be a little bit more that I need to do to make this kind of solvable and balanced. But yeah, I'm thinking about a game that we ran maybe a couple weeks ago where the wizard wish was that the demon had the pit hag ability, which I thought was really interesting and cool because usually you have a pit hag and a demon and they have to coordinate. And this player was
Mhm.
like, I want the demon to just be able to do pit hagging. But the consequence of that was like the wizard was then going to, sit there and essentially not have an ability because they had given the demon their pit hag ability. Um, what ended up happening in this game was that part of the price was that the storyteller said, okay, they can have it, but it's going to be the alchemist pit hag ability, so that way I can say no and I can prompt them to pick again if they ever want to do, which was actually fantastic because the first thing the wizard tried to do was pit hag the wizard into or the demon tried to do was pit hag the wizard into the boffin, and the storyteller was like, no, no, he stays wizard, like you don't get another minion ability because you have the pit hag ability. And so like, and the player loved that because they were like, yeah, that makes sense, that's really balanced and fair.
Mhm.
um However, where things started to get untraceable in this game was that the wizard then pit or the demon with the pit hag ability then pit hagged me into the puzzle master, and he was the Fangu. So then he killed me and I became the Fangu. And I had started the game as the empath. And so I was like, and in some ways it's like not that different from a game where you pit hag any other starting player, with the caveat that on like catfishing, if you pit hag someone into the demon and then Fangu jump or into an outsider and Fangu jump to them, everyone knows that that's possible because those characters are all on the script. And in
Mhm.
this case, the only thing on the script was wizard. So no one was expecting that the empath who like socially, knew that they were the empath on day one and had correct information was all of a sudden the puzzle master who was all of a sudden the Fangu. And that became a very interesting thing because I think for the storyteller, he had initially envisioned, people will be able to figure out that there is a sort of a pit hag ability in play and that this strange thing is happening because good players will get pit hagged into different characters and then they will talk about it. And that will be the clue that there is a wizard wish, which is that like there is a new pit hag ability in play. What happened in practice was that I got Fangu jumped, and I knew that Puzzle Master was out of play because I had become the Puzzle Master before I became the Fangu. So I then made the mayor into the Puzzle Master. He talked about it, but one of my neighbors was the mutant. And the player in this case was a player who is sort of like we all like know and love him for how chaotic he often is in the game. And so he often likes to, like lie and do chaotic things and say crazy things. And I was thinking about the game state and I was like, I actually think it would be better for me if I just start pit hagging this player, who I was pretty sure had started the game as the mutant, into just different townsfolk that weren't going to get that good information. And so I made him, so I make the mayor the puzzle master, and he talks about it. He's like, yeah, I became the puzzle master. So I think that like maybe that's to do with the wizard wish. Like I was the mayor, now I'm the puzzle master. But then the next day you have someone come out and say, I was the mutant, now I'm the town crier. And then the next day that guy says, I was the mutant, then I was the town crier, now I'm the farmer. And then the next day he's like, now I'm the amnesiac. And everyone was just like, oh, this player is just being very chaotic and evil and taking up all this space in the town. So like he's probably evil, which means there's a mutant elsewhere. And it made the wizard wish completely untraceable because instead of different
Mm-hmm.
players becoming different things, I just kept making the same good player into different things. And it was hilarious, like for me and for the rest of the evil team who knew what was going on. But in the end of it, I was like, I actually think as the storyteller there, I would have wanted there to be more of a hint, but I wouldn't have necessarily thought that there needed to be that because in my
Yeah.
mind, I'm expecting the evil team to pit hag different good players into different characters. And so that I think was a really big wake up call for me of like when you're setting this wish as the storyteller and when you're figuring out like what should this price be, what should this clue be, you you really have to resist the urge to expect your evil team to handle the wish in a certain way. Because if you put the clue essentially in the evil team's hands to say it's like your responsibility to, to make sure that the consequences of this wish are accessible to town and that town can understand what's going on, the evil players don't have to play in the way that you expect them to. And in
Yeah.
that case, like I didn't. And I was like, I don't think I was doing it to be like, I'm going to push the storyteller to like figure out whether or not he set a good enough clue. I was just like, oh, it's going to be really funny to pit hag my chaotic friend into like 5 different townsfolk. And and then at the end of the day, the storyteller was like, well, yeah, it wasn't that unbalanced because like you had a town crier when you didn't before and you had a good Emney when you didn't before, but no one believed him. And so I do think that when we're setting these like prices and clues for these wishes, it is actually really important to take some agency as the storyteller in terms of how that wish is going to become visible to town. And it's okay to do a little bit more than you think you should, because remember, like the good team doesn't have all the pieces. They don't know what's going on. And so even
Mm-hmm.
if you do make the wish like more obvious what's happening, that's okay because it's still going to take time to figure out like what is happening in the game.
We on this podcast we bring up atheist quite a bit because it's kind of I say divisive character, and it's for a storyteller. It's an advanced character, and the storyteller really needs to be familiar with the game and how people play the game, and et cetera, et cetera. And that way they can run it in a fun way. And I imagine Wizards want to be probably the exactly same level. It really works best to know the game, know what's possible, what's not, and yeah, I just imagine it being definitely more on the advanced side.
Yeah, it is a really difficult character to run. And I also think that's one of the big things with the wizard is that it's okay to not get it right the first time. I think when the wizard is on the script, similar to like when the atheist does on the script, first make sure all your players are down for like that to be the type of game that you're going to play. Even when the wizard isn't in play, there's still an aspect of people going, what if there's a wizard doing something? and they don't necessarily know what that something is or how it works or what's going on. And if you have players who are like, no, what I like about Clocktower is I want to know that there is a puzzle that I can solve and that every single piece of the puzzle is available to me from the start, and I can figure out, and my job is basically to determine like which pieces do I put in the puzzle of all the pieces that I know are already in the box and are already there. Like if that's the mindset that your players have, and then you go, let's play a wizard script, like really just make sure that your play, like that's the best advice I could give to someone who is
Yeah.
storytelling the wizard, is to say first and foremost, make sure that you have buy-in from your players, that like they are all cool playing a game that is inherently going to be not solvable in the way that Clocktower has historically been solvable, with the exception of like Amni and atheist shenanigans. And so I think that's it's a really good starting point, because if your players are all on board for like, hey, we're going to do this thing, there's likely going to be shenanigans involved, and it might not be super balanced. It's actually honestly the mindset that we ask from our playtest community when they come into games. We say, hey, like this might really suck for you. Like we had a playtest game the other day where the demon was killed on day 2, and it was absolutely brutal. He had no way out of it. Everyone knew he was the demon, and he just died. And he had to like just be okay with that, because if he was like, this was unfair, this was unbalanced, it's like, yeah, but that's kind of just part of it. And I do
Hmm.
think quite early on with the wizard, that is going to be part of it, because not every storyteller is just going to have the experience of having run wizard enough to have that like 100% certainty of like, this is the right choice. This is the right amount of balance. This is the right price. This is the right clue. And not to say that there is one right price or right clue, but that there is, I would say, more of like a window. It really helps to picture it as a spectrum of like anywhere in this area. If you get your price sort of in that area, and if you get your clue in that area, then it's probably going to be a pretty fun and exciting and fulfilling game for all the players. But it takes a lot of practice to go like I don't know, if I tried archery right now, I probably wouldn't like shoot the arrow on the target the first time, just because I have no idea what I'm doing. And I do think that there's a big aspect of that with wizard. Like even storytellers who have tons of experience running games of Clocktower, this is just, it is a different part of storytelling. It is a different piece of your storytelling brain that you need to kind of activate and hone
Hmm.
and practice. And so I do think it's going to take time for storytellers to start to figure out like, how do I get my arrows in that target area for the prices and for the clues? And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. It doesn't make the wizard a bad character. It just makes it a very advanced character that requires time and practice and like a lot of thought and consideration. And even like little things too, because I've run probably like somewhere between 30 and 50 wizard games at this point, which isn't that many in the grand scheme of games of Clocktower that I have run or played in. But I remember the other day, it was the game where the wizard wished to make all of the minion, just to have more minion abilities. And he said that, and then he went and walked away. And I just stood there, like deep in thought, being like, oh, that's really fun. What do I want to do to balance this and to give a clue to the town? And I was thinking through different options, but I was literally just standing next to the gram with like my arms resting on the countertop, just like thinking, like very deep in thought. And I realized after the game, I was like, if anyone had just looked over at me, they would have been, and they had seen the person who had just walked away, they would have been like, 100%, that is Jams figuring out what the price and the clue for the wish should be. And so that means that the person who just walked away is the wizard. So let's just kill him because he's evil. And I had never until that point thought about like, oh, it's even that aspect of storytelling matters. Obviously online you have a little bit more space, because you can kind of just like, you could even turn your camera off for a minute and pretend that you've gone to get a drink of water or gone to the bathroom or something. Like there's, you have a lot more space, whereas in person, if someone comes up to you and makes a wizard wish, like you actually need to physically be able to not look like you're thinking about what you want to do for that wizard
Yeah.
wish, because otherwise people might see that. And that was something like, even just that aspect of it I hadn't thought about. And that, I think it just really goes to show like just how much goes into running the wizard and just how many different pieces there are. Because that was like literally had nothing to do with the game itself, had nothing to do with the like the content of the wish or anything. But I was like, oh, like there is like even that matters when you're running the wizard. And so yeah, there's just so much that goes into it. It is very, very much something that like can and should be practiced, and requires that understanding and buy-in from your players, that like you as the storyteller are practicing, that you're learning how to run
Hmm.
this just as they're learning how to play with it. And that like if it's not balanced, like I know Ed often says, you know, after the game it's so important to have conversations with your players, that like even I think he goes as far as to say that when that the conversation, like the post game discussion, is part of the game itself. And
Hmm.
so I think it does, especially with the wizard, like it is really helpful to have those conversations after the game and go, so this was the wish. This is what I chose to do. How did you all feel about that as players? Because getting that discussion going is going to be amazing feedback for you as a storyteller with the wizard. And will also, I think, help for like players, because if you're having that
Yeah.
discussion, it means you're also talking and thinking about what happens when I make a wish, which then helps you make more wishes, which is exactly what every wizard player wants. So
Yeah, that's what I was going to say with the, it'll, I'm sure it'll be a bit of an adjustment for players as well, figuring out, what to wish. And hopefully our players are being kind to their storytellers who are working through this and, trying to figure it out like everybody else is. And one more bit of strategy, I guess, I wanted to ask about was, Wizard is a once per game ability, and like any once per game ability in this game, there's that little bit of trade off of how late do you use it early, get it out of the way, or do you use it later where it could be more impactful, but you risk losing it. So I'm curious if you have any examples of somebody who maybe waited later to use it, or wish that they had held on to it a bit later.
yeah, I actually think in most cases I've seen the wizard do, I think maybe once I've seen a wizard go on day 2, but almost exclusively I've seen
That
people go on day 1. And I do think
doesn't
part of that
surprise
is that
me. Yeah.
we're still very early in the journey of the wizard existing and like being a thing that we're, I mean it's existed for a while, but we've done, playtesting sort of over like in the grand scheme of times that people have played with the wizard. It's not that big compared to something like the fortune teller or the savant. And so I do think that like as the metas and the playstyles around the wizard evolve, there's going to be a lot more of people going, oh, like actually in this case it might be really useful to wait. I think for example in the case of the guy who wished that like the people who like players who picked in the night actually picked the person, like actually picked a neighbor instead, I think they would have benefited from waiting, because then they would have realized,
Hmm.
oh, this doesn't affect anyone good's ability. Like this actually isn't that help. Like this is just bad for my team, and I'm not getting the benefit that I had expected. Um, I do think part of it now is that a lot of players, in my experience, enter the game going, oh, I have a whole list of things written down. I have like a wizard wish list of things that I want to do as wizard wishes. And I'm just so excited to get them out that the first thing I see the token, the first thing I'm going to do is go to the storyteller and be like, this one, this is what I want. And like, I mean, I'm even personally guilty of that. I had a wish on my list for ages that was specifically public role claims happen. So if somebody claims to be the gossip and they make a gossip, if it's true, then just someone dies because that's a gossip kill. If somebody claims to be the and like the consequence, I was like, I love this because it has a built-in price, which is like if anyone claims to be the Slayer and they shoot my demon, they will die and the game will end. So I was like, or if like anyone is the Al Sahir, they can Al Sahir, like, or not even is the Al Sahir. If anyone Al Sahir guesses the evil team, we just lose. But I was like, the positives of that are that like I can just gossip a true thing and someone will die. When I died because it was a Vigor Mortis game, I claimed Moonchild, picked a good player, and then they died the following night. And I was like, this is hilarious. Like, this is so much fun. Um, what I did not consider with that particular wish was that a wizard wish itself is and can also be a public role claim. And so what I didn't factor in was that all of the good players just started making wizard wishes and they all happened. So like Ekin was like, I wish that everyone has the fisherman ability. And then Ekin was like, everyone go get fisherman advice. And so then everyone was like, well, Ekin's probably pretty good because like everyone now has good, useful, helpful fisherman advice because of Ekin. But on the flip side, there was a guy who just said, I wish that I could be a different character. And that person was then turned into the recluse, which was very helpful for me. So I was like, he got to make a wish. He is a different character. What I didn't also plan on was my demon then wished for it to be a riot game on day 2. And so they became Riot, which my fisherman advice was then tonight you will become Riot. Beware. And I was like, oh no, what have I done? And it really spiraled. But I do think getting back to sort of the original point of like, do you wait? Do you sort of come right out the gates? I think initially when there are people who are so excited because they're like, I've had a wish for so long that I'm just so excited to make, those folks I think are more inclined initially to just go right to the storyteller and be like, here's my wish that I've been dreaming about for however long that I'm so excited to make and I just want to do it right now. Whereas I do think that like there is a whole untapped realm of wishes that are really useful to make later in the game that that like we haven't thought about yet. And so I do
Hmm.
think that that's going to be a really fun space to explore. But in my experience, it's been almost exclusively people going, I'm just so excited to make my wish that I'm not going to hold it. I'm just going to make
Yeah,
it. I
that
just
makes
want to
sense.
do it now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not surprised with that. I was just curious if anybody had been trying to hold off on it. Before I make my wizard wish, is there anything else about the wizard you'd like to talk about?
I mean, I just as you were talking about that last bit, I was thinking because you were saying, oh, like make sure that you make the wish before you run out of time. One of the things I do appreciate about the wizard is that it is very fisherman and artist esque, where like if you're about to die by execution, you can ask for a storyteller consult
Oh
and go
yeah,
make your
yeah,
wish. If there's not a fisherman and an artist, or if both of those things are like in play, it might look very obvious what's happening. But I do think that it is kind of nice that like it's very rare that the wizard won't have the opportunity to make their wish,
right,
unless there's some like real weird amnesty stuff, or if a golem happens to hit you during day one nominations and you haven't wished yet. Like there are some situations where you might be prevented from making a wish, but in general, like even if you're about to die, you can still make that wish when you're about to die by execution. And you can, again, that wish is going to stay in play just because of the nature of how the wizard works as a character. So if you wish for something and then like 2 seconds later you are executed and you die, that wish still enters the game. It's still part of what's going on. And so I do think that there's a lot of space for that as well, which is really nice.
yeah. All right. So I was thinking about my wish a little bit before we started this. We talked about it, and I also make this wish knowing that there's a recluse in the script, just because I think that could be fun. I would wish for all the minions in the game to have the Boffin ability.
Oh, that's really fun. Um, I I actually remember seeing a similar wish to that. I don't remember. Oh, you know what? That's what it was. I wished recently that everyone had the Plague Doctor ability, specifically when Patters was storytelling, because I was like, Patters will have fun with this. He will enjoy getting to give everyone. But then the price of that wish was that every single Plague Doctor ability gave the demon a new amnesiac ability. And so my demon was going absolutely crazy because he had like 5 or 6 different amni abilities and he had no idea what any of them did. And like most of them were sort of like not super helpful for the evil team. But it was really, really funny because it was like players were worried about like, oh my God, what if there's an extra poisoner? What if there's an extra Cerenovus? Like we don't know what's happening. And so I do think if you wish that like all minions have the Boffin ability, I think that is, one route you could go with it is to say, okay, you all give the demon something that's just like not that helpful and also
Right.
is going to take up the demon's time and be distracting for the demon. Like it is helpful and it should still help the team, but it's not going to
Hmm.
be like, okay, great, the demon now has like I mean, I'm trying to think of like the three most useful things. Like maybe the demon now has the mayor ability, the cannibal ability, and the savant ability. Like that is very unlikely to be what would happen. I would probably, I think, if there was a recluse in play, or even if there wasn't a recluse in play, I might turn a different outsider. For example, if there was a living plague doctor, I might go to them and say, hey, you are now the recluse. You now have the like the boffin ability is this, just to give a little bit of a hint. Because I think if you're creating that,
Hmm.
I like the idea of something like that. I also think it could potentially be really funny, maybe not as fun, but funny to just give like, okay, there's now 3 Boffin abilities in play. Great, they're all savant. The demon now has 4 savant abilities, and just give them like really like sort of helpful information, but it's so much to part through that like overwhelmingness of information might not be as good. But that also really depends on the player. If like JC is the demon in that situation, I know he loves the savant. I think he would find that funny and engaging and interesting. If it's a player, like I know some people who really don't like the savant because they're like, I like to remember everything in my head, and being the savant stresses me out because I am more social reads inclined than I am mechanically inclined. I would
Yeah.
not do that to someone who, if that was the demon, if they was like a really social read heavy player who was like, I don't want savant information, because they would just go, that's not helpful. I've just learned that savant is out of play, which I was already pretty sure about. And then So I do think that there's aspects of that. But yeah, I think that's a really fun, really any wish that's like everyone has X ability is such
Hmm.
a great starting point because it's really like there's so much beauty in the simplicity of that. And I love the idea of going, hey, like I want everyone to have every minion to have the Boffin ability. I do think that as a clue and a price for that, I would likely like give a recluse a Boffin ability as well, and like make it very clear, or I might just make an announcement to town, where like I might just yell, "Look out! Oops, all boffins!" or something like that, because it doesn't even have to be like you're saying to people. There was a
Yeah.
game where the wizard wished just for everyone to have the tinker ability, which obviously the price was that all the evil players also had the tinker ability, so like they could be killed by it too. But in that case, I specifically just when I brought everyone back to town on the first day, I just said I would like to announce that there is a tinker ability in play, which immediately prompted someone, I think Richie, to go, I invoke Tinker and I choose Patters. So I just said Patters dies, which then prompted a chain of literally 5 other people, which was great because this was a 15-player game that I was really panicking about ending on time. And by the end of day one, 6 people were dead. So I do think there is a lot of space to just kind of come out the
Yeah.
gate and do something like that. But yeah, I love wishes that are just everyone has this ability because they're pretty straightforward. They're not too hard to balance because it's easy to think about. Okay, if some people have this ability, then does it balance it if everyone has this ability? Does it balance it if people know that that ability is in the game when it wasn't before? Like it can be. Yeah, those are. It's such a nice starting point. Really love that.
You know what's funny is I was thinking about recluse when thinking about that wish, and in my head it was like, well, maybe a recluse will give an extra boffin ability to the demon. I wasn't thinking recluse is now a demon with a boffin ability, so I love that.
Yeah,
Separate
and
from
I think
that,
you could even
yeah,
do both too.
yeah. Separate from that, I also just had the thought that'd be funny if the demon had all of the savant, fisherman, and amnesiac ability. So he has to like spend all day just like talking to the ST.
Yeah, exactly. And it like genuinely that is something that is such a reasonable balance of a price because if you're spending all day talking to the storyteller and going, "Hey, can I have this? Can I have this? Can I have this?" That is an entire day every day that you're not spending talking to other good players and convincing them that you are on their team. And so there is again there's so much more I think with the wizard beyond just like the actual mechanical pieces that are going on that really goes into like okay, what's happening in terms of the information that's being put out into the game, like what's happening in this respect.
Yeah. All right. Anything else about the wizard you'd like to talk about before we go?
Not that I can think of. I think just like if there's one thing that I hope people like sort of take away about the wizard is like have fun with it. It is a fun character. It is designed to bring like as much as it is designed to bring sort of like chaos and shenanigans to the game, it's also very much designed to bring joy to the game. And thinking about the game again, like this weekend where we had a wizard say like, "Can I put minion abilities in play?" The thing that I remember most about that game was that every single night when I made the announcement of who had been targeted by what minion ability, the players were laughing so hard. Like it was just so funny to be like, and it was like kind of terrifying. Like I think just watching, I would be nervous if I heard of the night like this player has been targeted by the pit hag ability, this player has been targeted by the harpy ability. But it also just, I think in that situation, it brought so much joy to everyone. And I do think that the wizard, like beyond all of the things that it does in the game as a character and as a powerful minion, it also is just such a great tool for joy. And so I hope that people like can see that in the wizard and are excited to be able to use it to just bring more joy to their games of Clocktower.
Yeah. I guess one more quick question before we go. Is this the last character release for a while?
Likely, yes. So essentially, where we're at is that we've been working really, really hard over the past couple of months to make sure that every single character we have released up till this point, including the wizard, is at a point where we're happy with the way that the ability works. We're happy with the ability text because that means we can go and print it on a physical token. And so I believe I'm not allowed to say anything about the timing for the process of physical tokens actually landing into people's grimoires and houses and lives. But what I can say is that up till this point, we have met every single deadline that we have been given by our manufacturers. And so once we know more about shipping timelines, we will be making an announcement to say this is when tokens are appearing. But yeah, we've been working super hard to make sure that all of the tokens are up to date, are ready to go. There might be a couple surprises on the way, but as for now, this is going to be the last character release, which is also why we were like, the wizard feels right because it's just there's so much to do. It's such a world of possibilities. And so we didn't want to just leave you with like just some character that it's like, oh, it does this. Great. What's next? Because with the wizard, there is so much in it. There's so much of a playground that just opens up. And so we know that it is going to be we have there's so many characters that are in the works that we still are putting together, but we really wanted the time to say, hey, as much as we love doing character releases, every single hour that we spend on making sure characters are ready for release is an hour we don't spend developing and testing and refining the expansions. And we know how much people want the expansions. And so that is essentially the choice that we had to make. It's why I'm down in Sydney, because this is where the bulk of our playtesting community is, here in Sydney and in Melbourne. And so I basically am now in full expansion ready mode of like, we're testing these, we're making sure that they are consistently getting developed and refined. And so as much as it is a bummer to not be able to give you all new characters every single month, it also is this is the price and this is the clue. This is like what we're doing, because we really do want to make sure that we can get these expansions out as soon as possible. So yes, this is going to be the last monthly character release for the indefinite future.
All right, Jams, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for having me. This was really, really fun.
Yeah. All right, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you again next time.